No Contendo, again, active in the chat today. No Contendo with a super chat that says
Big
45
shout out.
ran Jeff Sessions out, and Jeff Sessions has been silent since. Isn't that true? That Jeff Sessions, who was the big Trumpy, really carrying Trump's water in the early part of his term, then he and Trump parted company, and it was ugly.
Well, there's this sense of having duty. I mean, I worked with people like this. I was, I wasn't political at all, but I was in the quote Reagan administration. I worked under two U.S. attorneys who were picked by Ronald Reagan, and there was just nothing political about it. I've told you before. I worked with Adam Schiff, a fellow Democrat, in that same office at the same time, and there was absolutely a sense of honor. There were things that you could expect of somebody, no matter how conservative or liberal they were. And one of them was to recuse yourself. Sessions had to recuse himself under Department of Justice rules and hand it off to somebody else. They handed it off to Mueller. And I used to get in trouble with this when I was on CNN because I said, don't wait for Mueller to save the democracy. Go out and vote. He's not going to save the democracy. And he didn't.
Well, you were so right. But I mean, yeah,
he was past his prime, too. He was past his prime, too. He should have had that brilliant fellow who's on MSNBC testify in front of Congress. But again, he was the special prosecutor. He testified. He did a terrible job of explaining what that investigation was all about and how he really had the goods on Trump. He did a terrible job in front of Congress. And then they were yelling at me, Mark, on CNN. They were saying, I thought you former federal prosecutors, you were the cat's pajamas. Well, he wasn't the cat's pajamas the day he testified in front of Congress, and people were very, very disappointed. And on top of that, he got played, remember, with the executive summary. That was not a summary. That was a false narrative, a short false narrative that Bill Barr put out. And he seemed to think that he could trust Bill Barr. But what I'm saying, Mark, is that people like Sessions, like Mueller, they brought certain rules and regulations that they imposed on themselves. They had this sense of this is how things are done. And these folks would have lost the ability to control the investigation of Trump, as Sessions did. They would have, there were certain things that, for your honor, for the rule of law, you would do them, although they were not in your party's political interest. And I don't.
Although it bears, don't you think, David Katz, it bears reminding people that Bill Barr.
I didn't mention him.
No, not in the ethics run. No, because you made a reference to the fact that he essentially papered over the Mueller report. I mean, he worked outside of any kind of ethical imperative that's associated with working for the Justice Department or public service. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, I think he violated basic ethical standards. What he did with that Mueller report and papering it over and giving Trump a pass, it was despicable.
Absolutely. The ones that I mentioned were Sessions, who I probably disagreed with on more political issues than just about anyone to come down the pike in a while. But I think that what he did was compelled by the rules of ethics, and he obeyed them, and he recused himself. And Trump wanted Sessions to be his Roy Cohn, someone who just came along and impeded that investigation or stopped that investigation. And so as I say, Mueller certainly made a few mistakes from whatever you want to call it, a presentation point of view, although he really did get the goods out. If anyone ever takes the time to read the Mueller report, it's damning. It's damning on obstruction of justice. There's 9 or 10 different instances. He tells a fellow there at the White House, his White House counsel, one of his top White House lawyers, he tells him, go do this thing. The guy comes back the next morning and says, I slept on it. I can't do it. I won't do it. I will not do it. And then they have a whole story, which is, counterfactual of how that went down, which they tell the world. That is an obstruction of justice. If a corporate executive put in the record something that was counterfactual of what actually happened and published it to the world, then, of course, there was firing Comey. There was so many things. He ended up getting rid of the majority of the top 10 people at the FBI. People have to realize how extraordinary that was. I mean, the FBI, they got a lot of guts. They have a lot of problems, too, but they have a lot of guts. How many guts can you have as a lower down FBI official trying to investigate properly when you see that top boss after top boss denied a pension, fired, and maligned? The next one, brought up on charges.
No,
Trump did that
exactly. And you know,
along with
even
Barr, and Barr
e-
didn't stand in the way of that. Barr didn't stand in the way of that.
and his appointments. I mean, even Christopher Wray, you know, he turned on him like a rabid animal. I mean, it was just it's bizarre that you can't do enough for the former President Trump. You know, he wants your loyalty and he wants your self-sacrifice all the way to the end. And the last thing I'll say, just because you talked about it, is, and I think maybe you've made this point before, you know, these are guys, and I use it generically, men and women who work for justice, who are, you know, they have families and they're not making a lot of money. And the fact that a president and those with a political axe to grind could ace them out of a pension or a job, I mean, ultimately, it's a real crisis for them, a family crisis. What do I do? I have friends at the Justice Department who actually left the Justice Department during the Trump administration. They were worried. They said that there was a guy, I think I mentioned this before, there was a guy there who wasn't a lawyer, was what my friend told me, but he looked to see if there was a connection between cases pending at the Justice Department and I think it was FOT, Friends of Trump, or FOWH, Friends of the White House, or whatever. It was a bizarre like middle management position, you know. So you saw these institutions being truly corrupted, you know, even though they have issues, the Justice Department. You, I'm sure, saw many of them when you were working there. I mean, the kind of corruption that was going on during the Trump administration took it all to another level.
Can I say one comment about Trump? And I haven't studied this, and I'd be interested if somebody really has studied it. I mean, people have an emotional reaction to what I'm about to say, but it'd be interesting if someone has really studied it. But what I saw of Trump, and I was commentating a lot, I was trying to pay attention with this sort of in mind. How much of it was him helping his cronies, which was enormous, and how much was really punishing his enemies, a la Nixon? And I don't think that there were a lot of, like, let's say, income tax audits. I think they did a pretty good job of keeping the IRS clean. There is this weird thing that happened with Comey and one of the other FBI guys, where they had this super intensive IRS audit. And that there was like one chance in 5 million that those two enemies of Trump would be picked out. So I'm not saying that it was perfect, but when you look through the people who were actually indicted, I didn't see a lot of people who were indicted. You know, there was the guy who ran for against DeSantis down in Florida, and the FBI seemed to have made a case that, you know, taking tickets, getting 2 free Hamilton tickets, and the FBI made a case against the African-American candidate down there in Florida who ended up losing to DeSantis, who was a huge Trump friend at the time. So there were certainly some instances like that, but I thought it was more him favoring his enemies, you know, beyond belief, more than going after his name. Now, he went after them on Twitter. I get it, having your name, you know, my friend Adam Schiff, you know, being insulted and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure Adam and his family needed a lot more protection than if Trump hadn't said all those awful things, and that's terrible. And so there's that kind of absolutely a persecution. But that's the kind of persecution that sort of an Elon Musk could also do because of their huge social media presence. But in terms of sicking his attorney general on people or U.S. attorneys on people and prosecuting political enemies, I think there'd be a lot of that if he got back in office. But I'm just saying, you know, when he tried to help Stone, he helped Bannon, he pardoned a lot of those people. You know, we remember those instances where he certainly tried to help his cronies in the criminal justice system. But how many times he actually went after, had a U.S. attorney go after a political enemy? People may remember them better than I do. But and maybe that he had, you know, I think Sessions wouldn't have put up with that. Barr, I don't know. The jury's still out on Barr. I think people need to really investigate you know, what exactly was going on with Barr.
I think Barr, and even just apropos of Kamala Harris and the back and forth with Kamala Harris, I think Barr really was, she let him off the hook, actually, in that back and forth, I thought, when she asked him, you know, did the president ever ask you to prosecute or to, what was you know, to take legal action against someone on behalf of the president? And he, or suggest, I think she used it. She said suggest, and he was thinking, and, you know, it's like, dude, if you have to think about it, then that's a, you know, and I thought she kind of let him off the hook on that, but more to the point, I think there were some dirty deeds going on. I got to let you go, David Katz, but I want to get your real quick take on something, and that is a voter suppression move in Arizona where they're requiring proof of citizenship. They're trying to get this proof of citizenship law, and it's being litigated in the courts. Just give me your take on this, the idea. I mean, many would say, hey, what's the problem? They have to prove that they're a citizen in order to vote in the United States of America. Why is that an issue? Tell me about the proposed law.
Some people say everyone has a driver's license. Everyone has a form of ID which will show whether they are or are not a citizen. First of all, that's not true. A lot of the rubber hits the road with things like the Native American reservations. What kind of proof do people have? It hits the road with older people. Do older people have those documents? How hard is it to get the documents? When you show up to vote, if you show up without that document, they won't allow you to vote. What the Supreme Court has said, as I understand it, is that they are going to allow for this current election in Arizona, I think is the state, right, Mark?
Exactly.
They're going to allow for this election in Arizona that whatever was okay before is okay now. So this is going to be prospective. Hopefully they will not the Supreme Court doesn't seem to have put its finger on the scale of this election. What it means for precedent in the future may be very troubling. But at least for this election, Arizona, is one of the swing states. People who want to send cards or make calls into Arizona should fight like hell to win Arizona because it's a winnable swing state for the Democrats, despite this ruling. But yes, at some point, it looks like the Supreme Court's going to decide whether you have to have photo ID or not. And if you have to have photo ID, it's going to disenfranchise a lot of people, either because they're not, in fact, born in the United States. And if that's the criterion for voting, and people say, well, my God, of course we should get to the bottom of that. And, that's a political difference. Someone who's lived here for 40 years, made a life here, abided by the law. There's someone we should have had a comprehensive immigration bill to give that person status a long time ago. And if, some small percentage of those people are voting, I don't think, oh my God, there goes the republic. But there actually are a lot of people who are U.S. citizens who'd have a lot of trouble proving that they're U.S. citizens because they're older. They don't have a lot of formal ID. It's difficult for them to go and get ID. They have to go on a computer. Some older people, some other people are not good at using computers. And then there's a lot of Native Americans in those places. And apparently that's a pretty fraught. There's tribal records. They may not show whether you were born in the United States. So that's what's kicking around right now, but it shouldn't affect this
election. You're saying this election, yeah,
not going to affect this election. So we'll worry about that on a show after November, Mark. Okay.
Okay, it's a deal. Look forward to our conversations. You can find David Katz across the spectrum, as I say. BBC uses him, London radio. You'll find him on television stations across America, and also, of course, on Fox News. They love you over there because you're you represent sort of a dispassionate view of things, and they put you in those panels with some pretty strong right-wingers, pal. You hold your own without being a jerk about it.
We're doing News Nation, especially on the weekends, and sometimes Trump has a rally, and the way it ends up, the other person either has lost interest or gone and done something else, and I'm left there in the studio when Trump finishes, so I get to do the rebuttal. What Biden wasn't very good at, Mark, I'm quite good at. And
that's great.
The economy is actually better. We're the envy of Europe. Our inflation is lower. Crime rate actually went down. I'd knock those points out. And, they're eating dogs and cats. You can't make that up. If he can win this election after they're eating dogs and cats in Ohio, I've lost how many people have lost their minds for how many years over Trump. But you say, my God, the spell has to break. The fever has to break for these people. They're eating dogs and cats in Ohio. I want this man as the leader of the free world.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was going to be a winning political message, but we shall see.
There's never been anything like this.
Yeah, right. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.